Good morning. So who remembers playing Monopoly growing up? Or still play Monopoly, right? One of the longest games ever to be played. Especially it gets really long, like when you sell everything on the board is sold, but nobody has a monopoly. You know those games, and they go on for hours. And so finally, if you get in that situation, that game, what happens is that usually the person who either owns Park Place or Boardwalk, if you remember the game, one of those two will start making some deals. You know, they're like, I'll give you Indiana Avenue, get out of jail free card, and $200 in cash for Park Place, Boardwalk. And so you'll try and purchase and make a deal about properties to try and speed up the game. But when I was watching those deals, I was like, no, don't do it, because they're going to win the game. Because anybody who gets those two properties and puts those hotels up, they're winning the game eventually. It'll be another hour and a half, but they're going to eventually win the game. So it's all about this, trying to make this deal for financial profit, for financial gain. And today we're actually seeing a deal that happened between two brothers that had financial implications for the future. And it was a deal that Jacob and Esau made. How many of you all have ever made a deal with a sibling? Remember getting in trouble and saying, I will do the dishes for a week if you don't say anything to mom or dad? So you make these little side deals to kind of quiet, it's kind of a little extortion going on there, but we go along with it, right? And so there's these things that happen in families, these deals that happen in families, and sometimes those deals can go bad, and those deals can lead to problems in our relationships with our families. And one of the things that is leading up to this is this actually starts. Some of the problems for Jacob and Esau actually start in the womb. Did you notice that? I mean, Rebecca's even complaining about it. Now those of you who have been pregnant know what it's like to carry a child. If you can imagine, some of you can imagine twins, but you can imagine just one. There are two children in your womb, and they are going at each other, wrestling with each other. And if you've ever had raised boys, you know that that's what boys do. And so they're wrestling even in the womb. They're competing even in the womb. And God reveals to her that this wrestling match is actually an indication of the future. And so Rebecca learns that. The other thing that's going on here is that, did you notice that not only are they wrestling in the womb, they're wrestling when they're coming out of the womb. When the birth happens, Jacob gets his name. Jacob means heel grabber in Hebrew. And so he is grabbing his brother's heel as they're coming out of the womb, right? In the birth process. And so I've got this is my interpretation. I have a brother. Some of you have brothers, sisters, right? I know that I see this happen with my own daughters. And my interpretation is this. You remember when your mom or dad were going to go somewhere and the passenger side seat was empty and somebody would yell, "Shotgun." I think either Esau or Jacob in the womb yelled shotgun. This was a shotgun thing. One of them said, I got shotgun, and they started like tripping each other, grabbing each other, trying to pull each other back to try and get to that passenger seat, to get the first one to be there. And that's exactly what's going on between Jacob and Esau, even from their birth. There's this competition going on, this wrestling match. And how many people here have raised boys? Yeah. Can I get a witness to the wrestling? Yeah, thank you, Paul. My brother and I wrestled all the time. There are holes in walls, doors broken down, all kinds of things I could tell you stories about that we did in those wrestling matches, that we got that going on. The other thing we learn from this passage, and we learn about Esau and Jacob, is that no two kids are alike either. Parents, if you're a parent, you know this with there's no two kids. God does not create anybody, doesn't clone. Did you know that God is not in the cloning process? God doesn't make us exactly alike, and I think there's some real reasons for that. But in this case, Esau and Jacob are like opposites. They're described as kind of like personality opposites. One's more introverted, quiet, staying in the tent, reading books to himself. Maybe he was a herder of sheep. And then there was Esau. Esau's out in the fields, the adventuresome one, the extrovert, the one who's out hunting and being adventurous and doing all these things. And so you get these different personalities that are also clashing in the family sometimes. And then adding to that one parent favored one and one parent favored the other. So favoritism. So you've got competition, personality differences, and favoritism that are not helping these two guys in their relationship with each other. And so things were probably not great as brothers go up to this point, but then we get to the deal. And the deal is that Esau's out hunting, and he's been searching for game, for meat, for his family. And he's been out hunting. He may have been out for several days. He may have gone without, he may not have been successful. He may not have had any food for the past couple days. And he comes back home and he comes back to the tent. He's not been successful in the hunt. And he comes in and he sees this red, the NRSV says red stuff, red stew. Now when he saw the red, that implied to him, that communicated to him that there was meat in that stew. The thing that he had been hunting for, looking for, longing for the past several days, spending all his focus, all his energy trying to obtain, he now comes home and he sees this red stew and he assumes that's meat stew. And so Jacob has kind of got his brother right where he wants him. Now I know you and I would never take advantage of our siblings, but that's exactly what Jacob does. Jacob seizes the opportunity, just like, when your brother or sister came to you and said, don't tell mom, and you go, all right, I got him right where I want him, What can I get out of this? And so Jacob works a deal with Esau and says, look, if you sell me your birthright, which that meant that when their father died, he would get double inheritance. See, the firstborn got double the portion of inheritance when the parent died. Today we split everything evenly, hopefully, but in that day, the firstborn got twice as much as everybody else. And so when he sells his birthright, he's basically saying, all right, when dad dies, you get my double portion of the inheritance. But at this moment in Esau's life, he's like, what does it matter if I don't live to inherit? What if I die tomorrow because I'm starving? What's the point? And so what Esau does is he actually trades long-term blessing for short-term relief. Sometimes we do that. We give in to the pressure. We give in to the moment. We give in to the intensity of the desire, whatever it is, and we trade long-term blessing, God's long-term blessing, for short-term relief or short-term gain or self-gratification. So that's what Esau's wrestling with and struggling with. But Jacob, he's not real innocent here in this situation. Because notice he doesn't tell his brother, hey, by the way, this isn't meat stew that you're trading for. He doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention that there's no meat in the stew. He kind of goes along with it. And what does he end up serving him if you read the text, if you heard it? What kind of stew did he get? Lentil, right? Big far cry between meat and lentils, right? I've had lentil stew. And I've had, pot roast. There's a big difference between the two, right? I like both, by the way. But when you're hungry, you want that pot roast. You want the meat. And so he gets lentil stew when he thought he was going to get meat stew. And Jacob is the one that kind of he's like the first con man, the first sales person that sold something to somebody and it didn't really turn out to be the way it was supposed to. You ever bought something and you get it home and it doesn't work the way they said it was going to work, or you buy the car and you get it home and it has all these problems and it wasn't as advertised? And that's exactly what happens with Jacob. So I can only imagine that all these things, the personalities, the competition, now this deal that's gone bad, it says that actually Esau despised his birthright. And so I can imagine that that's just creating more and more division in their relationship, which happens in family relationships over time. But if we keep reading this story in Genesis, and we didn't spend all time reading this story because it actually goes into chapter 32, and we're only in chapter 25, so this goes on for 7 more chapters. If we keep reading on, we find out that there is another thing that Jacob does to deceive his brother later. And it comes when their father dies. And there was another thing that would happen. When their father died, there would be the father on his deathbed would give his sons their blessing. And there was the blessing of the firstborn. Well, what happened was Jacob disguised himself as Esau because his father couldn't see very well or hear very well. So he disguised himself as Esau and went in and got the firstborn blessing from his father, pretending to be Esau. Again, he deceived. Again, he was the trickster, the con man, with the help of his mother, who favored him? His mom. And so they devised this plan. And at this point, when Esau comes back from hunting again, and his blessing has been taken from him, he is furious with his brother. And it says in the Bible that Esau wanted to kill Jacob. I can tell you, I would never kill my brother, but there were times, when you've had it, right? At this point, Esau has had it with Jacob, and I literally is going to kill him. And so what happens is Jacob flees for his life. He runs away from home, he packs up his stuff, and he flees. He runs away. And so this happens after this goes bad, and I think about that, and I can't imagine the resentment that built up within maybe both of them, especially within Esau. And you know what resentment is, right? Resentment is when you replay a feeling over and over again inside of yourself, in your head, in your heart. You just take that feeling that you have and you just keep replaying it over and over again. Remember when you were growing up as a teenager and you had that favorite song, whatever it was, and I won't start saying songs because then I'll start to tell you I grew up in the 80s, but when you remember that song that you just kept putting the tape on? For me, it was a record, tape, CD, whatever it is, MP3, iTunes, whatever, and you just keep playing it over and over and over again. What's a song you're playing over and over and over again right now? You don't want to admit in church. Okay, that's fine. But and that's what resentment is. It's playing the same tune over and over and over again. It's playing the same feeling over and over and over again, and all the things that led up to that feeling. And you just keep replaying it. And when you do that, when you and I do that replaying, it just builds the resentment in us. It just keeps building it up. And I can imagine over time, that's exactly what's going on between Jacob and Esau, is that resentment just kept building up in their relationship as brothers. They just kept doing things to each other that built up that resentment. Because I know that because I'm a brother. I remember growing up with my brother. I remember going on long car trips with my brother. Vacation. Mom and Dad put us in the back of the station wagon. No air conditioning. It's August. It's a 10-hour trip, 5-hour trip, 6-hour trip, whatever trip. And 15 minutes into the trip, we're both bored, right? We didn't have video games, folks. This little hand. We didn't have cell phones. We just had each other for entertainment. So, 15 minutes into the trip usually didn't take very long. We'd be like going at it, arguing, bickering about something. And my parents were like, I'm not going to put up with this for the next 6 hours, or whatever. And so my dad would come back with the hand. Now, he wasn't trying to hit us with the hand, but the hand would come over the back seat, come over the front seat into the back seat, and he said, there's a line right down the middle of that bench seat, right? Matt, you stay on your side of the line. Mark, you stay on your side of the line, and you just be quiet. So we'd quiet down. Old Dad's mad now, So we'd quiet down and we'd scoot over, and I'd be eyeballing him, he'd be eyeballing me, and we're both looking at the line. Just waiting, right? And sure enough, it was usually my brother. It wasn't me. It was usually my brother. He'd be like, nonchalantly, be reading a book or something, and he'd put his hand, on the seat. And his finger, his pinky finger would come across the line, right, And what am I doing? I'm policing the line, right? I'm paying attention. And I'd be like, Dad, Mark came on my side of the car. Mark came across the line. Mark, get on your side of the car, right? So I couldn't let that go. So I would be reading my comic book or whatever, or I'd take a little edge of the comic book and I'd ball it up into a little piece of paper. I'd be like, and it hit him in the head or hit him somewhere. He's like, Matt threw something at me. And I was like, I did not cross the line. The wind from the window came in and caught that piece of paper and threw it over there at my brother. I don't know how that happened. But I personally, physically, did not cross a line. You notice how we always find loopholes in the system? Because it's all about getting even. It's all about you do something to me, I'm going to do something to you, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we draw our lines, but that doesn't repair the relationship. That doesn't reconcile things. Just makes it worse. And so you can see how both Esau and Jacob, things in their lives and parents and family dynamics and these deals contributed to the resentment that had built up and the division that had built up in their relationship. And at some point, though, there comes a point where we need to decide whether we want to reconcile, repair that relationship. It takes work to repair a relationship. And sometimes as we mature and as we get older, we realize it's time to repair. Now, Jacob actually does that. And you know, the thing about the line and staying on your side of the line and having conflict is a lot of times we don't reconcile because we're waiting for the other person to come to us. And you know what the other person's doing? They're waiting for us to come to them. And so nothing gets resolved because we're thinking the other person needs to make the first move. We're thinking the other person needs to make the first overture. The other person needs to communicate the need for repair or reconciliation. And so we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait. And nothing happens. Now, there's another relationship that gets involved here. We're actually going to unpack that relationship in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about Jacob wrestling with God. Because it's Jacob's relationship with God that actually changes his heart about this. And God is the one that says, you need to go back to your land and to your brother and to your family. I can't imagine what it was like to be Jacob when God told Jacob to go back. What do you mean? He's going to kill me if I go back. But God tells him to go back, and so he's obedient. He listens and he goes back. He starts to make his journey back. But before he goes back, he sends a messenger to his brother and he says, look, I'm coming back. I'm going to send this message. I'm coming back. You know, it's kind of like I like to talk to you. Esau, in response, starts to come out to meet him with 400 armed men. I don't know how I would interpret that as a brother, but I'm not sure I would interpret it well. But there's some things then that Jacob begins to do. First of all, Jacob makes the first move, but some other things that Jacob begins to do to repair the relationship. So here's a couple things, and I think it helps us too to understand how we can bring about relational repair in our own efforts, in our own families, in our own relationships, whether they be marriage relationships, whether they be sibling relationships, or parent-child relationships, or extended family relationships. So, sometimes it just comes time. It's the time. God tells us it's time. And it may have been 20 years, 15 years, whatever. But sometimes God just says to us, it's time that you dealt with this. That's what's happening with Jacob. So he does a couple things. He takes the initiative, number one. But the other thing he does is Jacob gave his brother time and space already. 20 years, actually. They hadn't talked to each other for 20 years. They hadn't said anything to each other for 20 years. They lived apart for 20 years because of this conflict had escalated so highly. So sometimes it is appropriate to give time and space to conflict. When it is getting too dangerous, when it is getting too harmful, when we're harming one another, we need to get out of that situation. We need to distance ourselves. We need to build that time and space in so that we can think about, reflect on, learn from, and think about how to hopefully reconcile at some point, if that's the case, if God calls us to do that. But sometimes time and space is the right answer for conflict. Because sometimes we need to just calm down, get our head back on, and start to really reflect on what's really going on and get it reality. And then the other thing that Jacob does is Jacob sends multiple gifts to his brother. So he says, I'm coming to see you, and I think it's been enough time. It's time. God told me it's time. And then he sends gifts. So what he did was he sent a servant ahead of him with like a herd of sheep as a gift. Then he sent another servant with another group of goats, a herd of goats. And then he sent another servant with a herd of camels, as all his gifts to his brother. So if you can imagine, here's Esau marching towards his brother with 400 armed men, but the first thing he sees is a gift of a herd of sheep with a servant gift, then another gift, then another gift. which was probably, may have been, just saying, I'm here to reconcile. I'm here to make things right. I am here to put things back together with us. And so gift giving actually becomes a way of symbolic of relational repair, of a desire to repair a relationship. And so the gift doesn't solve the problem, folks. I mean, I remember Kobe Bryant, when he messed up in his marriage relationship, he gave his wife a big honkin' diamond ring. That didn't repair the relationship. A gift won't repair it, but a gift is symbolic of, I want to repair. I want to reconcile. So those are some things that happen that also that sometimes we can do to say to somebody, to communicate to somebody, hey, it's time. I want to reconcile. I want to be a part of reconciling with you. And so this becomes a way. But as I think about this, there's one other thing that has to happen. We don't learn this from the text. This is just me through life experience and raising kids, 2 daughters, not 2 sons, is that sometimes we just need to talk it through. Sometimes when we've given it time and space, and when it's time, and when we've made the approach and we've communicated we want to reconcile, you just have to sit down and talk it through in a way that's healthy and helpful to reconciliation. And that needs to happen sometime. You need to talk through. I know when my girls would fight when they were growing up, they don't fight anymore, of course, but when they were growing up, they would fight. And there were some times where instead of as parents, we would not referee the fight. My wife actually would do this. She would make a choice and she would say, you guys, Mom, we are not always going to be around for you guys. You guys have to figure this out on your own. You have to talk it through. You got to learn to resolve your own problems, because not only is that going to work for you here in this family, but it's going to help you in the rest of your life. If you can't sit down and talk things through and figure out how to resolve your own problems, stop, and not depend on us to solve them for you. Because there comes a point as parents where we have to hand off to our kids. I remember a wise person parenting class I took years ago, was a part of. They said, there was a quote there that said, anything that you're doing for your kids that they could be doing for themselves, you're doing them a disservice. Anything you are doing for your kids that they could do for themselves, you're doing them a disservice. And that was the approach we took with them sometimes when they had fights. There were sometimes we did step in, but there were times we said, you guys got to work this out. You got to talk it through. You got to figure out how to resolve it yourselves. Because that's a life skill. And it's a skill that's going to keep you as sisters for the rest of your lives, even when we're gone. So that's the long-term blessing, short-term versus long-term, to think about that. Because we all need to take time to reflect. We all need to think about ways we can reconcile, and we all need to think about how we can talk it through. I didn't tell you what happened, did I? Between Esau and Jacob. They finally meet. And what happens is, as Jacob approaches Esau, he bows to him. And he exposes the back of his neck to his brother, which was a sign of vulnerability. Because he's looking at 400 armed men. And when he bows and exposes his neck, he's basically submitting and making himself vulnerable, and he's giving his life over to the brother that wanted to kill him. That's vulnerable, isn't it? This guy could kill me. He could just pull out a sword or whatever and just let me have it. But what happens is Esau takes Jacob's head, doesn't wring his neck, he kisses him as a sign of forgiveness, and they embrace. They are reconciled. Which reminds me of another story in the New Testament. There's a son who squandered his father's inheritance and came home. And when he came home, he said, I'm not worthy to be your son. And he would have done the same thing that Jacob did to Esau. He would have bowed down before his brother, exposing his neck as a sign of vulnerability. And that same father would have, it says in the text in the New Testament, that he kissed him as a sign of forgiveness And he put a robe on him and a ring on him, and he restored his relationship as son. And that's exactly what God does for us. God is a God of relational repair. God is a God of forgiveness and reconciliation. God wants that in your life with you and God wants that in our families as well. Amen.